Well, here are your national headlines this morning. President Trump says he's ending all trade negotiations with Canada.
This after President Trump announced he's increasing the tariff on Canada by 10% in response to the...
Something extraordinary unfolded in Washington, and its effects are still rippling through boardrooms and trading floors across North America. On October 23rd, Donald Trump posted a single sentence on Truth Social: "All trade negotiations with Canada are terminated." There was no press conference, no diplomatic message, no warning, just one post that shook the foundations of the North American economy. It all started with a political ad in Ontario. The provincial government had launched a $75 million anti-tariff campaign featuring a digitally restored voice of Ronald Reagan criticizing protectionist policies. Trump called the ad fake, accused Ottawa of crossing a line, and within minutes turned what was meant to be a local public relations campaign into a full-blown geopolitical crisis. Within 24 hours, US markets reacted sharply. Stocks tied to electric vehicles and clean energy dropped more than 4%. Investors scrambled for clarity, as supply chain experts warned that industries reliant on Canadian minerals and metals could face immediate instability. For decades, those raw materials had been the backbone of American manufacturing, powering everything from automobiles and defense systems to high-tech electronics. Now, almost overnight, that flow was in question. Canada's mineral wealth has always been remarkable. The country holds vast reserves of lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and rare earth elements, the essential materials behind smartphones, electric vehicles, and fighter jets. In 2023 alone, Canada's mineral production was valued at over $70 billion. As one of the few democratic producers of these critical minerals, Canada wasn't just another trading partner for the US. It was an industrial lifeline. Yet with that one social media post, the relationship was suddenly on hold. Trump had long promoted the idea of reshoring industry, bringing manufacturing back to the United States instead of relying on imports. But cutting off trade with Canada went far beyond reshoring. It meant attempting to rebuild an entire economy that had become deeply integrated across the border. The real shock wasn't just the announcement itself, it was what the announcement revealed: a fragile interdependence that few in Washington were ready to confront. For decades, the US and Canada had functioned like two halves of a single production system. Their industries, from aluminum and steel to semiconductors, were so intertwined that halting one would inevitably disrupt the other. The sudden pause turned that quiet interdependence into a glaring vulnerability. For the first time in modern history, America's closest ally held the upper hand. By walking away from negotiations, Washington had effectively locked itself out of its own supply chain. Canada isn't just another trade partner, it's the hidden infrastructure behind much of America's modern economy. In 2023 alone, Canada exported nearly $29.8 billion worth of critical minerals to the United States. Between 2018 and 2021, it supplied 45% of America's nickel, 66% of its zinc, 31% of its vanadium, and 16% of its cobalt. All materials the Pentagon classifies as essential for national security. These are the metals that make EV batteries, radar systems, and missile components possible. So when trade talks collapsed, it wasn't a routine policy setback. It was a direct disruption of the only politically secure and geographically stable mineral supply the US had left in the Western Hemisphere. Analysts warned that the fallout would ripple through the manufacturing sector almost immediately. One expert described the situation as a factory running out of raw materials in peak season. Within days, the effects spread from government offices to production lines. Industries built around clean energy, battery manufacturing, and advanced electronics began to feel the strain. For years, these sectors had depended on reliable imports from Canada and Mexico, two neighbors that kept supply chains functioning even during the pandemic and global shipping crises. But now, with Washington sparking trade disputes on three fronts, with Canada, China, and Mexico, the entire North American production network began to seize up. prices for lithium and cobalt jumped between 12% and 18% in just 2 weeks. The cost of producing an electric vehicle battery rose by roughly $200 to $1,500 per car. Factory managers in Michigan and Texas reported production slowdowns of up to 20%, citing delays in material shipments. What began as a protectionist gesture quickly became a self-inflicted chokehold on US manufacturing. Because these industries supply so many others, the disruption spread fast. Economists warned that even a 10% rise in copper prices could push national inflation up by 0.2%, forcing the Federal Reserve into a tightening dilemma right in the middle of an election year. While Washington hesitated, Ottawa acted. Prime Minister Mark Carney responded not with rhetoric, but with strategy. Instead of escalating the dispute, his government began redrawing trade routes across the global map. On October 13, 2025, Canada signed a major partnership with India focused on mineral and agricultural exports, opening access to one of the fastest growing markets in South Asia. Just weeks earlier, on August 26th, Canada and Germany announced a joint declaration on mineral processing, refining, and recycling, creating shared industrial infrastructure designed to bypass US bottlenecks entirely. Soon after, Japan and the European Union joined in through bilateral agreements to coordinate data standards and sustainability rules for critical mineral production. Meanwhile, Europe's industrial giants, including BASF, Umicore, and Rio Tinto, expanded their operations in Ontario and Quebec, fueling what investors began calling the Clean Mineral Belt. Through a series of calculated moves, Canada shifted from being a dependent supplier to an independent powerhouse. In a world dominated by trade wars, it positioned itself as a stable, transparent, and politically neutral source of critical materials. Exactly what the West needed. What started as a defensive move quickly became an offensive strategy. While the United States turned inward, Canada built outward. It connected its resource-rich territories with advanced economies, reshaping the supply landscape that underpins the entire Western industrial world. Under Carney's leadership, Ottawa has redefined its role, emerging as the architect of what many now call the Western Mineral Network. More than 31 Canadian critical minerals are now officially recognized under the G7's Strategic Resource Framework, giving Canada top-tier access to international investment and security cooperation. Early in 2025, the Canadian government launched a $122.5 billion Clean Minerals Transition Fund, a massive initiative designed to expand the country's mining, refining, and recycling capacity. But this effort isn't just about digging more out of the ground. It's about mastering the entire value chain, from raw ore to finished battery components, ensuring that every step of production stays under Canadian control. The results have been swift and striking. With clear regulations, strong environmental standards, and predictable policy, Canada has become one of the most attractive destinations for global investors. The country has already secured long-term supply agreements with the European Union and Japan, filling the gap left by deals that were once dominated by the United States. As these partnerships deepen, Canada now indirectly influences access to nearly 40% of the G7's total critical mineral supply. For a nation once seen as the junior partner in North American trade, it's a dramatic transformation. In just a few months, the industrial heartbeat of the West has shifted north. The economic lifeline that once ran through Washington now runs through Ottawa. But every power shift comes with consequences. By cutting ties with Canada, Washington didn't just lose a trade partner, it exposed a much deeper vulnerability in its own system. The slogan, "America First," is beginning to look more like "America Alone." The costs are already mounting. US manufacturers, especially in the electric vehicle and clean technology sectors, are now paying almost double what their European and Canadian counterparts pay for the same raw materials. With access to stable suppliers cut off, companies like Tesla, Ford, and Rivian have been forced to turn to distant and riskier sources in Indonesia, the Philippines, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, regions where prices are volatile, supply chains are fragile, and political risks run high. That instability is starting to show in the numbers. By the fourth quarter of 2025, profits across America's high-tech manufacturing sector had fallen by nearly 7%, marking a second consecutive quarterly decline. Battery producers, semiconductor manufacturers, and even defense contractors are feeling the squeeze. Each of these industries once relied on a steady flow of materials from Canadian mines. Now, shortages are slowing production, raising costs, and shaking investor confidence. Meanwhile, north of the border, the story looks very different. Canada, together with the European Union and Japan, has launched a $40 billion trilateral investment framework aimed at securing critical minerals and expanding clean energy production. Through this initiative, they are coordinating every stage of development, from mining and refining to recycling, ensuring stable access and continuous innovation across continents. As these alliances grow, the United States finds itself increasingly isolated from the very economic system it once helped to build. The center of Western industrial security is shifting, and Washington is no longer at its core. This isolation is already visible in trade data. American manufacturers are paying more and waiting longer for essential imports because they now have to work through intermediaries, often European corporations with direct links to Canadian suppliers. Each additional layer adds more cost and delay. A supply chain that once took weeks to complete can now take months. For industries where timing determines competitiveness, that kind of lag can be the difference between profit and collapse. Around the world, other nations are taking note. Mid-sized economies such as Australia, Norway, and Chile are studying Canada's approach, exploring how to reshape their own resource policies to balance economic growth with strategic influence. They see in Canada's rise a blueprint for how smaller nations can transform their natural resources from simple commodities into powerful geopolitical tools. It's a mindset shift, one that Washington once led, but no longer controls. So, what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the Timefold channel.